Amara had always been gentle and respectful, even when life gave her reasons to be angry. When she married Chuka, people whispered about how she came into the marriage without dowry. His mother, Madame Ifienwa, never let her forget it. Every day she found new ways to throw sharp words at Amara, reminding her that she came with empty hands. Amara bore it quietly, never raising her voice, never defending herself in public. She loved Chuka, and she believed patience was stronger than pride. One evening, the entire family gathered around the long table in their mansion for dinner. Plates were filled, laughter echoed, and yet Madame Ifienwa's eyes searched for her chance. As everyone ate, she cleared her throat loudly and began to talk about how women of value bring wealth, gifts, and honor into their husband's home. She looked straight at Amara and said, "Some wives bring blessings, others bring nothing but shame." The room grew tense, and all eyes turned toward Amara. Her husband shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Amara's heart beat fast, yet her face stayed calm. Instead of answering with words, she reached into her bag and pulled out a brown envelope. Slowly, she placed it on the table and slid the papers across to her husband. Curious, he opened them and froze. The family leaned forward, whispers rising. Chuka's hands shook as he passed the documents to his mother. Madame Ifienwa adjusted her glasses, her proud smile fading as her eyes moved down the page. The silence grew heavier. The papers showed the name of the true owner of the mansion, Amara. She had inherited it quietly from her late father, who had left it in her care long before she married. All those nights of cruel words, all the mocking and insults, had been spoken under a roof that belonged to her. Gasps filled the room. Plates were left untouched. The relatives who had laughed along with Madame Ifienwa lowered their eyes in shame. Amara did not gloat or raise her voice. She simply sat back, her calmness stronger than any insult. Madame Ifienwa could not speak. Her lips trembled as the reality sank in. The woman she had mocked for bringing nothing was the very reason they had a roof over their heads. The dinner ended in silence, but for the first time, it was Amara who walked away with her head held high, leaving everyone stunned by the truth that a wedding anniversary filled with music, laughter, and shining lights. The hall was decorated with flowers and gold ribbons. Families, friends, and neighbors all came together to celebrate the couple. Amara sat quietly beside her husband, greeting people with her warm smile, while her mother-in-law, Madame Ifienwa, walked around the tables with pride. She had always found ways to belittle Amara, and that night, she chose the crowd as her stage. When the microphone was handed to her for a toast, she laughed and looked around the room. "Some wives bring fortune, some bring honor," she said loudly, her voice carrying through the hall. "But some bring only poverty into a man's house." The guests chuckled nervously, glancing at Amara, who lowered her eyes. Madame Ifienwa went on, telling stories of how her son had married a woman who came without riches or gifts. The hall echoed with whispers, some guests covering their mouths in shock while others smirked. Amara's husband stayed silent, trapped between his mother and his wife. Amara sat still, her hands folded neatly, her face calm despite the storm. She did not answer or rise to defend herself. Instead, she quietly waited, her silence stronger than words. Just then, the sound of footsteps broke through the tension. A man in a dark suit walked in, holding a leather folder. He introduced himself as a lawyer and asked to speak. The room grew silent as he stepped forward and handed documents to Amara. She rose slowly and opened the folder. The lawyer explained clearly that the property where the family lived, including the very land beneath the grand house, had been legally transferred to Amara. Her late father had arranged it before his passing, ensuring his daughter's security. Gasps filled the hall as people leaned forward to see. The papers carried seals and signatures that left no doubt. Guests turned their eyes to Madame Ifienwa, whose proud face drained of color. The same woman who had mocked her daughter-in-law for being poor now stood exposed. Every whisper in the room shifted, now aimed at her. Amara did not shout, did not boast. She simply held the papers close, her dignity shining brighter than the decorations. The celebration that began with laughter ended in stunned silence, and everyone left knowing the woman once humiliated was, in truth, the rightful landlady of it all. Amara was often the target of bitter words from her mother-in-law. One afternoon, while relatives gathered in the compound, Madame Ifienwa raised her voice for all to hear. She mocked Amara harshly, saying she had come into the marriage with nothing, not even a pot or cloth. The words stung like a whip, and the relatives laughed uncomfortably. Amara lowered her gaze, her lips pressed together, while her husband sat nearby, silent, choosing not to defend her. The silence from the one man who should have stood by her made the insult even heavier. That night, Amara lay awake, her heart heavy, yet she kept her pain hidden. Madame Ifienwa, however, was not satisfied with mocking alone. She began to whisper to her friends that she would soon remove Amara from the house. Plans were quietly made to chase her out, to prove she did not belong. She bragged that her son would find a better wife, one who could bring wealth and honor. Word spread through the village, and gossip filled the air. Days later, Madame Ifienwa called for elders to gather, claiming it was time to send Amara away. Neighbors came to witness the humiliation, expecting drama and disgrace. Amara stood quietly in the courtyard, her head bowed, while her husband still remained silent, unwilling to go against his mother's wishes. Just as Madame Ifienwa raised her voice to announce that Amara should leave the compound, a respected figure entered, the village chief. His staff tapped the ground as he walked forward, commanding silence. The chief looked at Madame Ifienwa, and then at Amara. He held a folded document in his hand and spoke with authority. He revealed that Amara's late uncle, a man of great honor, had gifted the entire compound to her before his passing. The papers were signed, stamped, and recorded with the elders. Gasps spread through the crowd as the truth was laid bare. Madame Ifienwa's face drained of color, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Neighbors who had gathered to mock now looked at her with pity and scorn. Amara did not boast, did not shout. She only raised her eyes, calm and steady, as the chief placed the papers in her hand. The same woman who was mocked for bringing nothing was revealed as the true owner of the ground beneath their feet, leaving the crowd stunned and silent. Madame Ifienwa's anger boiled over one hot afternoon when she stormed into the courtyard and pulled Amara by the arm. Dragging her out into the dusty street, she shouted at the top of her voice that Amara had come into her son's house with nothing at all. Her voice was sharp and filled with spite, loud enough for everyone to hear. Within minutes, neighbors began to gather, leaving their chores and shops, curious to see the commotion. Children peeked from corners while elders shook their heads, whispering among themselves. Madame Ifienwa continued her rant, waving her hands and pointing at Amara, as if she were some beggar rescued from the gutter. Amara stood there quietly, her face calm though her heart pounded. She let the storm rage without a word, watching as neighbors' eyes turned on her. Some pitied her silence, others laughed at the insults. Madame Ifienwa raised her voice even higher, boasting that her son had married a woman who brought no wealth, no gifts, not even the smallest item of value. Her words cut through the air, each one meant to tear Amara down in front of everyone. But instead of crying or arguing, Amara straightened her back and, with steady steps, told her mother-in-law to follow her. Curiosity filled the neighbors as Amara walked toward the town center. Whispers spread quickly as people trailed behind, wondering what she planned to do. They reached the land office, a place of records and truth. Amara walked inside with quiet confidence, and soon after, an officer came out holding official documents. The officer unfolded the papers before everyone, reading aloud that the plot of land and the house built on it were legally registered in Amara's name. Gasps broke out from the crowd, the same mouths that had laughed moments before now wide in shock. Madame Ifienwa's proud face turned pale as she stared at the papers, unable to speak. The neighbors who once listened to her insults now turned their words against her, mocking her for humiliating the true owner of the house. Amara did not smile or gloat. She simply took the papers, thanked the officer, and walked away with dignity. The neighbors followed with murmurs of admiration, while Madame Ifienwa stood frozen in shame. The woman she tried to disgrace in the street had, in front of everyone, proved her power and silenced every insult with truth. Madame Ifienwa loved to put Amara down, and one weekend she decided to make it a show. She invited her siblings and cousins over to the family house, filling the compound with chatter and laughter. Plates of food were shared, drinks poured, and everyone settled under the shade of the mango tree. Amara served them quietly, offering smiles and greetings, while her mother-in-law waited for the right moment. Soon, with her relatives' eyes on her, she leaned back in her chair and began to speak with a mocking tone. She told them proudly that her son had made a mistake by marrying a woman who came empty-handed. She laughed as she called Amara a beggar, saying she had brought no dowry, no gift, not even the simplest thing to show respect to her new family. The relatives nodded along, some laughing with her, others glancing awkwardly at Amara. The words were cruel, meant to shame her in front of everyone, and Madame Ifienwa enjoyed every moment of it. Her voice carried across the compound, making sure even the neighbors passing by could hear. Amara stayed calm, moving from one guest to another, pouring drinks and clearing plates, her silence a shield against the insults. Her husband, once again, said nothing, his eyes lowered to his food. The laughter grew louder as Madame Ifienwa repeated the word beggar, pointing at Amara as though she were nothing. Everyone waited for Amara to break, to cry, or to storm away. But she did none of that. When the noise finally died down, Amara wiped her hands and stood before them. In a quiet but steady voice, she asked if they knew who paid the property tax for the house they were sitting in. The room fell silent. She walked into her room, returned with receipts carefully folded, and laid them on the table. The papers showed her name, year after year, proving she had been paying the taxes faithfully. The house, the land, everything they sat on belonged to her. Gasps filled the compound. Relatives who had laughed moments ago exchanged stunned looks. Some murmured apologies, others avoided her eyes. Madame Ifienwa's face burned with shame, her proud words now useless. Amara did not raise her voice or insult back. She simply walked away, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any insult ever could. At a church Thanksgiving filled with hymns and bright clothes. Families gathered with joy to celebrate. Amara sat quietly in her seat, clapping along to the songs, her face calm and humble. Beside her, Madame Ifienwa leaned closer to a group of women, whispering with a sly smile. She told them how her son had married a woman who came with nothing, repeating the old insult that Amara brought no wealth or gifts into the family. The women giggled behind their hands, glancing at Amara with pity, their eyes filled with judgment. Madame Ifienwa enjoyed their laughter, her whispers sharp and bitter. Amara heard the words but chose not to react. She kept her gaze on the altar, her lips moving softly in prayer, letting the gossip pass over her like wind. The church service went on, drums beating, children dancing in their bright uniforms. When it was time for testimonies and announcements, the pastor stepped forward with a wide smile. He lifted his hand and asked Amara to come to the front. The congregation turned, surprised, as Amara rose slowly and walked down the aisle. Everyone watched in silence, wondering what the pastor had to say. Madame Ifienwa folded her arms, waiting to see her daughter-in-law embarrassed again. But the pastor's words broke the room like thunder. He announced with joy that the very land on which the church was built had been donated by Amara. He explained how her late father had left it to her, and how she had chosen to give it freely so the church could grow. Gasps echoed through the hall. Murmurs rose from the pews as people turned their eyes from Amara to Madame Ifienwa. The same women who had giggled at the whispers now covered their mouths in shock. Children clapped, elders nodded in respect, and the pastor held Amara's hand high, blessing her in front of everyone. Madame Ifienwa's face turned pale. Her body shook as the truth settled in. The mocking words she had whispered moments ago now made her look like a fool. Unable to bear the shame, she stumbled and fainted right there in front of the congregation. Women rushed to lift her, fanning her with handkerchiefs. But the eyes of the people no longer mocked Amara. Instead, they looked at her with admiration, realizing the woman called poor was the one who had given the church its foundation. On Amara's birthday, the living room was bright with balloons, music, and laughter. Friends, neighbors, and relatives gathered to celebrate, filling the house with chatter and the smell of food. Amara moved quietly among the guests, smiling warmly as she served drinks and thanked everyone for coming. But as always, Madame Ifienwa found a way to turn joy into shame. She stood up in front of the crowd, her voice cutting through the noise, and began to speak with pride laced in bitterness. She told the guests that her son had married a woman who had no roots. She mocked Amara openly, saying she came from a poor family with nothing to her name. She laughed as she reminded everyone that Amara brought no dowry, no land, no wealth, just herself. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others chuckling nervously. Amara's husband sat quietly, unsure how to stop his mother, while Amara lowered her eyes, her calm face hiding the sting of the words. The insults continued, filling the room, but Amara did not respond. Instead, she waited until the noise died down. Then, with a gentle smile, she reached into her small bag and pulled out a shiny pair of keys. She handed them to her husband in front of everyone. The room grew quiet as curious eyes followed the simple gesture. Guests leaned forward, wondering what the keys were for. Her husband looked at her, confused, and Amara asked him to open the small box on the table. Inside was a set of documents tied neatly with a ribbon. He unfolded them slowly, and his eyes widened in shock. The guests gasped as the papers revealed the truth. The very house they were sitting in, the place where the celebration was happening, belonged to Amara. It had been bought in her name, secured with her inheritance. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some clapped in surprise. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. Madame Ayanda froze, her proud smile vanishing, her face drained of color. The woman she mocked as rootless was the true owner of the house she boasted about. Guests who once laughed now turned their admiration to Amara, praising her dignity and grace. Amara did not gloat or boast. She simply thanked everyone for celebrating her day, her calm smile brighter than the candles on her cake. The birthday that began with humiliation ended with respect, leaving Madame Ayanda silent in her own son's house. The market was busy that morning, filled with the sound of traders calling out prices, women bargaining loudly, and children running between stalls. Amara carried a basket, buying vegetables with a soft smile, greeting people politely as she moved. But peace never lasted long when Madame Ayanda was near. She appeared suddenly, her voice sharp and angry, drawing attention to herself. Without shame, she began to shout at Amara in front of everyone, her words slicing through the noise of the market. She mocked her loudly, telling anyone who would listen that her son had married a woman who brought no dowry. She pointed at Amara, calling her useless, saying she entered their home empty-handed, without land, without wealth, without even a single meaningful gift. The traders stopped what they were doing, eyes turning to the scene. Some women shook their heads, others whispered to each other, while Madame Ayanda's voice grew bolder, enjoying the crowd. Amara stood still, her basket in her hand, her face calm though her heart raced. She had endured many insults before, but this was different. This was public. People waited, expecting her to argue or cry. Instead, she remained quiet, letting her silence carry more strength than words. Then, out of the crowd, the market landlady stepped forward. She was a respected woman, known by every trader, and when she approached, the crowd fell silent. The landlady looked straight at Amara, then bent slightly and called her owner. Gasps filled the air as everyone turned in shock. She explained that the market stalls, the very ground they stood on, belonged to Amara. Her late father had left the property to her, and she was the rightful landlady. Traders confirmed it quickly, nodding and whispering, remembering how they paid rent under Amara's name. The crowd shifted, eyes turning sharply on Madame Ayanda. The laughter she enjoyed moments earlier was gone, replaced with mocking whispers aimed at her. People called her out for humiliating the very woman who owned the space. Shame burned on her face as she struggled to find words. Amara did not raise her voice, nor did she gloat. She simply thanked the landlady and walked away with quiet dignity, leaving her basket swinging at her side. The market buzzed with excitement, and the same crowd that once pitted her now praised her strength. Madame Ayanda, left standing alone, felt the sting of her own words turn back against her. Madame Ayanda had grown tired of mocking Amara with words. This time she wanted action. She whispered to relatives and neighbors that soon she would remove Amara from the house for good. She said her son deserved a better wife, one who could bring wealth and honor, not a woman who came empty-handed. In her heart, she believed the house was hers to control, and with that confidence, she began to plan how to throw Amara out. The whispers spread quickly, and many waited to see how the drama would unfold. Amara heard of the plot but stayed silent, her face calm and her step steady. She did not argue or confront. She went about her duties as if nothing was happening, though deep down, her heart carried the weight of it all. Madame Ayanda grew bolder, speaking loudly in the courtyard about how Amara would soon be gone, how she would pack her things and leave with nothing. Her words were meant to sting, and each day she repeated them like a song. One afternoon, when relatives had gathered and Madame Ayanda was raising her voice again, A car stopped at the gate. Out stepped a man in a suit, carrying a black folder. He introduced himself as a lawyer and asked to speak with the family. Everyone grew curious, their eyes following him as he entered the house. Madame Ayanda folded her arms proudly, expecting him to confirm her authority. But what he carried in his folder was the very opposite. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the documents. He explained that Amara's late father, a respected man of the community, had left behind a will. In it, he had written clearly that the house where they all lived was to belong fully to his daughter, Amara. The words were plain, the signatures sealed, and the witnesses recorded. Gasps filled the room as the truth settled like a stone in water. Madame Ayanda's face paled. Her voice caught in her throat. The relatives who had laughed along with her fell silent, their eyes now fixed on Amara. The woman they had expected to see thrown out was, in fact, the rightful owner. Amara did not shout or mock. She simply received the papers from the lawyer with grace. The same roof under which she was daily humiliated had been hers all along, leaving her mother-in-law drowned in shame and silence. After endless mocking, Emile slaps Amara right in front of the neighbors, the sound echoing louder than words. Everyone freezes, expecting the husband to speak, but he remains silent, looking away as if nothing happened. Whispers rise around the compound, some pitying Amara, others shaking their heads. With tears in her eyes but strength in her heart, Amara refuses to bow her head. She takes a deep breath, wipes her face, and calls out to the neighbors to gather. One by one, doors open and curious faces step out, drawn by the heated scene. Standing tall, Amara holds up a brown envelope, her voice steady. She opens the documents for everyone to see, spreading them on a table at the center of the yard. Gasps ripple through the crowd as she explains every word written and signed by officials. The papers clearly state that the entire estate belongs to her, not her husband, not her mother-in-law, but to Amara alone. Neighbors lean closer, some murmuring in shock, others nodding in approval. The woman they thought was weak and powerless is the true owner of everything they stand on. Emile's eyes widen, her face losing all color. She stumbles backward, unable to speak, the slap she gave now hanging heavy in the air like a curse that returned to her. Amara's husband lowers his head in shame, realizing his silence has cost him respect in front of everyone. The neighbors, who once stayed quiet when Emile mocked Amara, now stand firmly behind her, clapping and praising her courage. Whispers turn into loud voices defending Amara, declaring her strength, calling her the rightful owner, and warning Emile never to raise her hand again. Amara doesn't shout, she doesn't gloat, she simply folds the papers carefully, her dignity shining brighter than gold. She lifts her chin and tells them that respect cannot be bought, respect must be earned. And today the truth has spoken louder than insults. Emile is left speechless, powerless, and exposed. What was meant to break Amara becomes her victory, and the whole estate now knows exactly who holds the true authority. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Please don't forget to like, drop your lovely comments, and hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. Bye. Sparkling Heart.